Hi, my name is Maceo Stansberry, and welcome to ProdMaceAudio. Today, I'm going to be discussing how everything in your life is a system. If you look outside your window at the trees, or the clouds, or the cars, or the people, you might see them all as being separate individual things that don't have much to do with each other. But if you look closely, you'll notice that each single action of one thing affects the other. The clouds affect where the birds go and where they stay and where they fly to. The birds affect where the grass grows, what plants are where, because they drop seeds in certain places. The people affect whether or not they go outside or not, because if people are outside, there won't be many birds because birds are afraid of people. And the cars affect where the people can go and where they can't go. They also affect where the animals can go and where they can't go. And you'll notice that when you observe things in a more broad perspective, you'll see they're actually a part of a bigger system. There's nothing that exists that doesn't some way or another affect something else in the same space as it. So with that being said, everything in life is a system. And how is this useful? How can knowing that everything that we see, everything that we do, everything that we are told is some way or another made up of several parts that, in their sum total, create us and who we are and how we live? How can that be useful? Well, obviously, because it has to do with us, it affects how we live and it affects our lives. Knowing that everything is a system makes it more clear that we should be able to push and pull and shape our life based off of the systems we're a part of and the systems we create. We don't just live life separate from every other person or every other thing. We're always either influencing or being influenced by our environment and the systems that are a part of it. And this can be useful, especially when someone wants to figure out how to get their life together, or if they want to figure out how to achieve a specific goal. Because when you know that systems are what lead to specific outcomes, and systems are what create the lives that we live, then you know that the first principle of achieving anything or getting any sort of result we want is to create and use a system. But how do we create a system, and how do we know that our system we're creating is the right system to use? Well, system building is based off of system thinking, which is a more technical concept and has a lot of principles related to more, specific terms. But I'll simplify it to say that basically, a system thinker, any person that creates systems, has strategies that are combined to create a specific outcome. That is what a system is. A system is not planning. A system is not coming up with strategies. And a system isn't just, spitballing ideas. A system is a combination of all of those things. Remember how I mentioned earlier that the person, the birds, the clouds, and the cars all affect each other but are also individual? Well, that's what you need to do when you create a system. You need to have specific individual parts that each control and influence each other for the outcome you want. And this is very, very important, especially when setting goals. Because what ends up happening a lot of the time is we'll create a goal or have an objective, but we won't follow through on it because we don't know how to. And we don't have all the pieces in place. We might have one strategy here and one plan here and one actionable step here, but we don't really have a system. We don't have an environment to which we would be conducive to get what we want. And that is what system building is all about, creating the environment that will give us the results we want. But there's also a secondary point. There's two kinds of systems: positive systems and negative systems. Positive systems give us what we want. They give us exactly the achievements, the objectives, the ideas, the results, all the things that we want to achieve and get. Positive systems give us that because they have several parts working together. Like the gears in a clock that all turn that one hand to one point at a specific time of day. That is a system. You need to have several gears working together. That's a positive system, when we get what we want from the system. But a negative system is when the system doesn't give us what we want. It's usually caused by one part not doing all of what it should do, or maybe one part doing exactly what it should do, which limits what another part can do. Say, for instance, when a person's at a stop and they have to press on the brakes. That is a negative because it slows the car down, but that's what you want to do. But what ends up happening is that we sometimes push the brakes on things we don't want to stop. We sometimes push ourselves too far to where we don't have any brakes. And this is where it becomes nuanced between do we want a positive or negative system? Well, positive or negative is relative to the result that we want. We decide whether to use a positive or negative system based off of what do we want to get? What do we want to achieve using this system? And this is really important because a lot of times I notice that people will be like, well, I want the positive result, I don't want the negative result. But sometimes the negative is what gives you the positive. If you subtract calories from your diet and you weigh less, and that's what you want, then that's a positive. Even though you're subtracting, even though you're using a negative, you're also achieving a positive. And this is where systems thinking is so powerful, because sometimes a system can be negative, but it gives us what we want. And other times a system can be positive and we don't really get what we want. Positivity, or too much positivity in a place that we don't want it, can actually be bad. If, say, for instance, the wilderness, animals in the wilderness overpopulate, that will decrease the amount of plants and green life in a specific area, which can negatively affect the environment and the air, right? So we want to make sure that when we make a system, the system is working for our benefit. But now that I've gone over what a system is and how we can use it, how do we know that we've made the right system and we have the right system to use for what we're trying to achieve? It might seem complicated, but it's really very simple. A system has to achieve what we want, and basically, that's it. If a system does not achieve what we want, then it doesn't work. And that means we shouldn't use that system. There's nothing else that is more important than having a system work for us. A lot of times what ends up happening when people see systems in action, whether that be an industry, a company, or a specific environment, we see systems as something outside of us, rather than something that is around us and influencing our lives. It's not necessarily like it's completely outside of us, because what we consume is from the outside. So the inside is both the outside. There's nothing that exists outside of us that does not also exist within us. So if we see a system outside, that means that we can create a system within. And that's where we start when we start to create the system we want. We have to know that what is within us is what we want to see outside of us. And this can go a little bit esoteric, but I'm going to keep it really practical for this video. Something that you can take from and actually practice in your own life. When you're trying to achieve an objective, outline specifically what you want to achieve, and then go through what things have to be in place to make that achievement possible. And now if you've basically outlined the objective and the secondary parts needed to achieve the objective, now all you need to do is find out how to connect all those secondary objects together. It's like basically, playing connect the dots. How can I figure out how to get all these individual parts to work together to give me my objective? For instance, if you have, say you're struggling with a math problem and you don't know how to solve it, and you've looked at different books, you've watched different videos, and you just can't figure it out. There are two systems in your own thinking you can use to solve the problem. The one system is what's known as a focused state, and the other system is what's known as diffused state. A focused state is when you're completely concerned about whatever it is currently in front of you, right? When you're just really honed in and you're really focused, when you're trying to solve that math problem and you're just trying to figure out what it is, what's the solution. That's focused state. The other state is diffused state. So when you're not really thinking about anything, you're kind of daydreaming, you're just letting your mind wander, and it's connecting whatever sort of dots it wants to in its subconscious. Now, these two states combined create a system for problem solving. Now, why is that? Because you need to have both focus and diffusion, calmness, to be able to come to a conclusion about what something is. If you have too much focus, it creates a lot of stress. Your heart rate increases, your brain becomes frustrated, and it just becomes too confused to figure out what the solution is, right? Now, but if you have too much calmness, there's no structure there. There's no ability to really make things concise and to come to a concrete solution. So you have two ends of the spectrum. You have extreme focus and you have extreme calmness and relaxation. What you need to do is oscillate between the two, right? So what you would do to solve that math problem that's, paining you to figure out is you would be really concerned about figuring out in one moment, you set a specific time where you're going to work on it, and then another specific time to just relax and to not have to think about it at all. And what you'll notice happens is your brain begins to connect the dots on its own, because there's a specific actionable network in your brain that works when you're sleeping and works when you're relaxing. And that same network is what allows your body to decompress and restore muscle tissue and organ tissue when you sleep. That is the same communication network that tells your brain to figure out how to solve a problem. Because your brain is not just meant to be used one way. And this is what I mean by systems thinking. When you use a system, you figure out there's multiple ways to solve the same problem. There's not just one way, and there's not just one system. Just like there isn't just one part of a system that will give you exactly what you want. There are several parts of a system that work together to give you what you want. And when you realize that, you'll figure out, how can I make these other parts work together? How can I make all these little dots connect? And that's what is the main important thing when it comes to figuring out how to create this right system for you. Is you figure out what the objective is, you figure out what the parts are that would lead to that objective, and then you figure out how to connect all those parts together. And after you've done that, then you have a clear system. But the final step is the proof is in the pudding. And that basically means that you need to test the system to see that it actually works, that it actually gives you the result that you want. Because if you use a system and it doesn't work, it doesn't matter what you went through to figure out how to create the system. It doesn't matter what you went through to figure out what the parts of the system are. If the system does not work, if it doesn't give you what you want, then that system is useless to you. It might be useful to someone else, but to you and what you desire and your objective, it is useless, right? So we need to figure out, how do we know that a system works? Well, it gives us what we want. And now that we figured out how to come up with a system, we have objectives, we have parts. That's my timer. We have objectives, we have parts, we have all these different things, right? We've figured out what the system is, how it works, what to do with it. We have to use it. This is what's known as the testing stage of systems thinking. We've come up with a system and we figured out how to use it and what we want it to give us. We have to practice it. And this is why, if you notice, when there are systems outside of you, all these systems work because they've been tested by time and they've been tested by several people, right? All these other people, all these other things have used this system for decades. And in some cases, these systems have been around for centuries. So when we are put in these systems, it's almost impossible to find a way to break away from them or to find a way to not be affected by them. So when we are shaping our life for success and for achievement and for goal setting, we have to figure out how to make our systems work flawlessly. Our systems need to work consistently. They need to be as dependable as the current systems around us. And this is why a lot of times when it comes to achieving our goals, it is so hard. Because what we end up doing is not making systems. What we end up doing is finding goals that we like or that we think other people would, like us to like. We want to be accepted. We find goals that would fit the status quo and we do them. We try to get those, like, all these different challenges online and all these different, trends online that people say to do and to be a part of. All these things and these goals, they might be good, but they might not be for us. And even if they are, trying to do them exactly how people tell us to do them without a system in mind will lead us to failure, will lead us to frustration, and will lead us to just being at the same spot that we were before we even started, right? Or in some cases, even worse. Because it's much worse to have a goal and not have a system than to not have a goal and have a system. Because at least the system will be working even when you're sleeping. The system will be working and doing its job. But if you don't have a goal, if you have a goal and you don't have a system, you're more than likely going to fail. And you're more than likely going to be frustrated. Because everything around you is a system. And when I say everything around you is a system, remember how I mentioned positive and negative systems. A positive system is something that increases something, and in some cases that might be what we want, it might not be. And a negative system is something that decreases something. Likewise, that may be what we want, or it might not be. So when we're dealing with life and situations and problems, we have to realize, is this system positive in helping me? Or is this system negative in helping me? And we're just asking, is this system helping me? Generally, right? So we need to figure out, is this system helping? And if it's not helping, that means it's detrimenting us. It's causing us to be frustrated. It's causing difficulty. It's causing struggle. It's making hurdles. It's just making life more difficult. And this is what I mean by everything's a system. But not every system is created equal. Some systems just don't work for you. Right? Some systems just cause exponential growth. But we have to figure out what system works for us. We have to figure out what system makes us get the result we want. Because at the end of the day, it's your life. If you don't live it the way you want to, and you don't have the experiences you want to have, you're just going to live a life that you don't want. Right? So we need to find a way to use systems to achieve what we want out of life. And the only way to do that is through knowing our objectives, knowing the parts of the system, and testing it. Testing. Like the master of ceremonies when he's at a concert, he's about to perform, and he's testing that mic. Testing. You will not be able to get what you want if you do not test the system that you've created or that you've learned about. And in some cases, there are systems that work, right? There are hundreds and thousands, and maybe even hundreds of thousands of systems that are currently in cycle and working, and people are using them, and they work fine. But you have to figure out what system works for your objective. And that is only known by knowing what you want and who you are and what life you want to live. So when it comes to solving a problem, when it comes to figuring out how to get an achievement or to get a result, you have to figure out the system that works for getting that. And you have to test it and iterate and improve it and update it and all the things necessary to make it as streamlined and flawless as possible. Because every time we, struggle with something, there's always the opportunity for learning. And when we are struggling with finding a system and we're struggling with achieving our goals, there's an opportunity to figure out what really works. What is everlasting, is consistent, is dependable? What is that? And how can I use that? How can I find that? And that's the constant search for a system that really works. But you will only know it really works when you know the parts of it and have tested it. So this is ProdMaceAudio. Thank you for tuning in. This is Mace Stansberry, CEO of ProdMaceAudio. And I hope this video was helpful for anyone trying to achieve their goals and set systems and processes in place to get their goals achieved. Thanks for watching. Peace.